They smiled for the camera like it was any other day. Just 10 kids lined up in front of the whiteboard, some holding up peace signs, a few still laughing at some joke Ryan cracked just before the shutter clicked. I looked at that photo for the last time during my lunch break before the bell rang. And by then, every single one of them was gone. No sounds, no alarms, no calls to the office. Just an open classroom door and a silence that still makes my ears ring. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from down in the comments, and if stories like this ever touched your town or your school, hit that, like, and subscribe. Every click helps carry another name back into the light. My name's Dana McAllister. I was the guidance counselor at Northwood High back then. 38 years old, lived 3 miles from the school in a yellow ranch house with a dented mailbox and a maple tree out front. I'd been at Northwood 8 years, knew every kid by name, most by heart. My job wasn't just college forms and schedule conflicts. It was the quiet work of listening, of paying attention. And with this group, you didn't have to listen hard. They were alive with it, this hum of possibility. They had their corner in the cafeteria, same table every lunch period. Jake always carried his soccer ball even when he wasn't headed to practice. Amber kept sea turtle stickers on everything, her laptop, her water bottle, even her shoes. Ella wore her hair in the same low ponytail every day and always sat closest to the window. Ryan was the voice always cracking jokes just loud enough to get a groan from a nearby teacher. And Sarah, she was the observer. She noticed things most people didn't. I'd sit in my office sometimes and just watch them through the windows. I don't think they ever knew that. It wasn't surveillance. It was admiration, really. They were what we hoped for in this line of work, bright kids who cared about each other. They weren't just classmates. They were close, really close. A kind of closeness that makes you think maybe they'd hold on to each other after graduation. Maybe they'd be the rare ones who stayed in touch. Mr. Dalton once told me they reminded him of a family. He taught them history, said they pushed each other in ways that made him hopeful. And I felt the same. Every time I passed their table in the courtyard or overheard them planning road trips and dorm decor, I found myself smiling without even meaning to. But now looking back, I wonder if there were signs. Something just beneath the surface. A change in the air that none of us were willing to name. There was a Friday, just 3 days before the photo, when Ella missed our scheduled check-in. No text. No excuse. Not like her. That same day, Sarah came by after school, said she had a question about her transcript, but the way she kept glancing over her shoulder made me pause. I thought maybe it was just nerves. Finals, college applications, the weight of it all. But now, I'm not so sure. The night before the group photo, I stayed late to finish paperwork. Around 6:30, I passed by their homeroom. The lights were off, but I swear I heard movement, soft footsteps like someone pacing. I opened the door and found nothing, just the faint smell of something metallic. The room felt off. Still, I locked up and didn't think twice. I wish I had. The morning of the photo, the kids were all accounted for. Laughing. Normal. But by lunch, Mrs. Turner flagged something strange, 10 names missing from the afternoon attendance log. Not one call, not one note. She assumed it was senior mischief. I almost did too, until I went back to their homeroom. The door was cracked open. The desks were untouched. Their bags still lined the back wall. Phones left charging. Jackets on chairs. But not a single one of them was there. And that's when I knew whatever this was, it wasn't a prank. It had already started. I didn't say a word when I walked into that room. Just stood in the doorway for a while staring at those 10 empty desks. 10 chairs pushed in neat and still. The morning sun had shifted just enough to throw a soft glare across the whiteboard, and the air was quiet in a way that made the whole place feel wrong. Their backpacks were still lined up against the back wall, a few jackets draped over chairs like someone would be back any minute. There was a lunchbox left open on one desk, sandwich untouched. I remember reaching out to turn it closed, then stopping myself. Something told me not to move anything. The first real jolt hit when I saw Kyle's phone on the charger beneath his desk, still lit up with the wallpaper I'd seen 100 times, some blurry photo of a skateboard ramp. I stood there for maybe a full minute, heart starting to thud, not fast, just heavy. Then I left the room and went straight to the main office. Mrs. Turner, our attendance officer, was already on edge. She'd flagged the absences earlier that morning, but assumed, like the rest of us, that it was some coordinated ditch day. Seniors pull stuff like that all the time. But I knew this group. Ryan couldn't keep a secret for more than 24 hours, and Amber had never missed a full day of school, not once. I asked if anyone had called in. Nothing. No parents, no messages. I asked if she'd tried reaching out to them yet, and she looked up at me like she was just realizing this wasn't routine anymore. I picked up the phone and dialed Ella's number myself. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. I left a short message, tried to keep my voice steady. Then I did the same for Jake and Sarah, one by one, until I got through all 10. By the time second period was over, word had started to spread. Mr. Dalton came down the hall asking if I'd seen his homeroom class. That's when he heard it, what we were already fearing. He stood there silent for a beat, then turned and walked toward the main stairwell without another word. His knuckles were white around the railing. I don't think he even blinked. Other teachers noticed too. Miss Hall from English said she hadn't seen Amber or Sarah all day. Coach Linton mentioned Jake missed morning practice for the first time all season. What started as whispers started to pull at the edges of something bigger. Even the students were quieter than usual. No bells ringing, no announcements over the intercom. It was like the school itself was waiting for something. At lunch, the courtyard was mostly empty. The table where they always sat, same one near the west wall, shaded by the awning, was untouched. There were unopened packets of napkins on it, like someone had dropped them there and walked away. That's when I went back into the classroom again. I don't even know why. I just couldn't sit with the feeling I had in my chest. The desks were still the same, the air still stale and still, but this time I noticed something I hadn't before. A pen, black, slightly scuffed, lying on the floor just under Ella's seat. I picked it up without thinking. There was no label, no initials, just standard plastic, slightly too sleek to be one of ours. I didn't recognize it from any of the school supply orders. I held it for a second, then tucked it into an envelope from my office and labeled it with the date. By the end of the day, no one had shown up. Not one of them. We checked lockers, phones left charging, keys in bags. Amber's planner still open to Friday. Sarah's library book overdue by 3 days. It all looked like they'd just stepped out for a few minutes and never came back. Mr. Davis, our principal, called the sheriff's department around 3:45. I stayed late sitting in the faculty lounge trying to piece together anything that made sense. A group skipping class. Sure. A prank maybe. But leaving their phones, their wallets, their things, that didn't fit. And 10 kids, all gone at once. Detectives showed up by 5:30. They took statements, walked the halls, asked the usual questions. Had anyone seen them leave? Were there any arguments, threats, signs of distress? The answers were all no. Security cameras hadn't caught anything unusual. No footage of the group leaving campus. No strange vehicles. No signs of forced entry or exit. The classroom door was unlocked, the windows shut. No broken glass. Nothing on the cameras but static for a few seconds around 8:10 a.m., right when first bell rang. Just long enough for something to slip through unnoticed. By that night, the parents had started to arrive. Some were calm, still sure there was an explanation. Others were already in tears. I remember Amber's mother pacing the lobby with a folded photo in her hand, whispering her daughter's name over and over like she might hear it echo back. Kyle's dad kept trying to call his son's phone, redialing it every 10 minutes, getting the same silent voicemail each time. I stayed until after dark, sitting in the office while the investigators reviewed everything again. Around 9:30, someone found a phone ping Aiden's one of the quieter boys in the group. The signal came from a field 5 miles out past the tree line off Highway 12. It was faint, but real. A search team was dispatched immediately. I didn't go, but one of the officers gave me a call about an hour later. Nothing. No tire tracks, no footprints, no sign of struggle. Just grass swaying in the wind and the faint remnants of a phone signal that had gone cold by the time they arrived. I sat in the dark that night, that classroom photo open on my desk. Their faces frozen in that moment. Eyes bright, shoulders leaned together. Nothing in that image told you it would be the last anyone ever saw of them. The next morning, the school reopened like it always did. Buses pulled in. Kids filed through metal doors. But everything felt wrong, quiet in a way that scraped at your nerves. The first bell rang again, but this time there was no shuffling, no footsteps down the science hall. That classroom stayed empty. And from that day on, we weren't a school anymore, we were a scene, a place where something unspoken had happened. And no one could agree on what that something was. But I remember this one thing clearly. On the windowsill behind Jake's desk, there was always a small blue rubber band he used to fidget with during tests. It wasn't there the first day, but when I checked again 3 days later, it was back, coiled tight like someone had placed it there deliberately. The classroom had been sealed. No one was supposed to be inside. But there it was, right where Jake used to leave it. Waiting. When I brought the rubber band to Principal Davis, he stared at it for a long time before setting it down without saying a word. We were both quiet, standing in his office with the blinds half drawn. That was Monday afternoon, 3 full days after the disappearance. The classroom had been sealed again, but something about that little object showing up when no one should have been inside. It kept clawing at me. Davis finally exhaled through his nose and said he'd pass it on to the sheriff's office. I could tell he didn't believe it meant anything. Maybe I didn't either, not completely, but it didn't belong there. Not anymore. By the end of the week, the mood at school had shifted into something we didn't have a name for. The halls weren't just quiet, they felt cautious, like the building itself was waiting to exhale. Students whispered about what had happened, but the story kept bending depending on who you asked. Some said the group had planned it. Others said it was some kind of group dare or maybe a cult thing, though none of those rumors ever made sense. I spent more time in the front office those days, mostly listening to parents call in their voices tight and clipped, asking if there was any update. We had nothing new to tell them. The sheriff's office had made a public statement midweek. They called it a group absence under investigation and urged the community to remain calm. What they didn't say, but what we all knew, was that 10 kids had vanished in the span of a few minutes. No sign of struggle, no exit recorded, no trace. The police kept circling the same questions. Was there a conflict? A bullying incident? Did any of them show signs of emotional distress? But none of it fit. I sat in on most of the interviews, not officially, but as a familiar face. It was easier for some of the students to talk that way. I remember a sophomore named Lydia Pace telling me that Ryan had seemed distracted the week before. She said he was quieter than usual, spending more time by himself between periods. But then again, finals were coming up. Half the senior class was run down and stressed. That wasn't a red flag. Not on its own. The police pulled the security footage again and again. Same blank spot at 8:10 a.m. They couldn't explain the interference. Just static for 10 seconds, then everything back to normal. That Friday, I left the school a little after 6. I usually stayed later, but I needed to clear my head. As I passed the parking lot, I saw Mrs. Brenner sitting in her car, Kyle's mother. Her window was down and her face was still. She'd been there for hours. I walked over, leaned in just enough to let her know she wasn't alone. She didn't look at me right away, just said, "His hoodie's still in the dryer. I can't take it out." I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't. Over the weekend, the community held a candlelight vigil at the middle school gym. It was the only place big enough to hold the crowd. I stood near the bleachers listening to parents take turns at the microphone. Some of them read poems. Others just stood in silence and held up photos. A few spoke directly to the kids as if they might hear them through the walls. I didn't speak. I couldn't. That night as I drove home, I caught myself looking in my rearview mirror every few seconds. I kept thinking I saw someone step into the road behind me, but each time I turned, there was nothing. That next Monday, the district brought in a crisis counselor from the county office. I remember her name, Rebecca Klein. Soft voice, professional, very composed. She sat with the faculty and explained the script we were expected to follow, acknowledge the incident, redirect focus, provide support, reinforce normalcy. I listened, but none of it sat right. These weren't vague students in need. These were kids I knew. I'd seen their handwriting, read their college essays, watched them grow up. Reinforce normalcy didn't mean anything to a town where 10 parents still hadn't heard their child's voice in over a week. Still, I tried to follow the plan. We all did. The following day, I stopped by Amber's house. Her mother had asked if I could bring over the scholarship paperwork Amber had been working on. When I arrived, the house was spotless. Too spotless. The kind of clean that comes from needing to control something. Amber's room hadn't been touched. I could see the corner of her vision board taped to the closet door. Photos of aquariums, marine science labs, handwritten quotes about ocean conservation. Her laptop was still open, her tabs frozen mid-application. I handed over the manila envelope and her mom didn't even look at it. Just placed it on the counter like it was too heavy to hold. As I turned to leave, she asked me the same thing I'd heard a dozen times that week. "Is there anything you're not telling us?" I told her no. That I wished I did. But the truth was, I had tried to tell someone, several times. I'd left messages with the sheriff's office about the rubber band, about the timing of the static, about the way Sarah's locker had been opened sometime after the building had been cleared. They said they'd log it, pass it along to Detective Hayes. But no one ever called back. I mentioned it to Rebecca Klein during a staff debrief, and she gave me a polite nod, then shifted the conversation to managing staff anxiety. When I brought it to Principal Davis again, he tapped his pen on the desk and said we had to be careful not to feed into hysteria. That word stuck with me. Hysteria. As if concern over missing children was something to be regulated. Over the next few weeks, things got quieter. The news coverage slowed down. The flyers started to curl at the corners. Some families kept pushing Amber's, Ella's, Kyle's especially. Others started retreating, pulled tight by their own silence. The school board called a meeting about reputation management, and we were advised to avoid discussing the case with the press. A local blogger tried to publish a theory about a satanic panic angle, and the district sent a cease and desist within 24 hours. By October, the desks in that classroom were finally cleared, not by family, by order of the administration. Personal items were boxed up and returned except for what the police still held as evidence. I stood in the hallway while the janitor Carl packed it all away. He worked in silence. When he was done, he locked the door and handed me the key without speaking. I asked what would happen to the room. He shrugged, said it might be used for storage. That night, I found an envelope slid under my office door. No note. Inside was a printed email. The sender was Sarah Blake. The timestamp was 2 days before the disappearance. It had been forwarded from someone with a generic email address, no subject line. I read the message once, then twice. It wasn't long, just a handful of words. They said we wouldn't remember. But I do. There was no explanation, no signature, just that. And suddenly it felt like someone else out there still knew what this was, or what it was becoming. The printed email from Sarah Blake stayed in my drawer for over a month. I didn't bring it to the police. I didn't hand it off to the principal. I just kept it there in that plain envelope under a stack of student forms I couldn't bring myself to file. Every so often, I'd take it out late in the afternoon when the building was quiet again and the light through my office window turned that soft yellow-gray. They said we wouldn't remember, but I do. That was all it said. No subject line, no signature. The message had been forwarded from someone anonymous, but the timestamp was real 2 days before they disappeared. Sarah had sent that to someone she trusted, and whoever received it had waited weeks to come forward. I don't know why they chose me, but I never stopped thinking about it. By the end of October, most people had moved on, at least on the surface. The school board pushed forward with new initiatives. Attendance climbed back up, and we held a fall pep rally that felt more like an obligation than a celebration. Teachers were smiling again, but not with their eyes. We were all still there physically, but not in the same way. I found myself avoiding the second-floor hallway altogether, even though it was the most direct path to the counseling wing. I started using the back stairwell by the art rooms instead, where the lights were always dimmer, and the silence didn't feel as loud. It was around that time that I noticed my own behavior shifting. I kept a running notebook at home, logging anything that felt out of place. A flicker in the hallway lights that didn't match the circuit pattern. A voicemail with no sound that showed up at 2:08 a.m. and wouldn't delete. I didn't tell anyone about the notebook. Not Davis, not the crisis counselor, not the sheriff's office. I knew what they'd say, that it was stress, that unresolved trauma can create patterns where none exist. And maybe that's true. But I also knew how many of those kids had sat in my office telling me about things that didn't make sense. I remembered Jake's hand tapping that same rhythm on his knee for weeks, only to stop the day before the group photo. I remembered how Amber asked me twice in 1 week if the school kept track of which computers were being accessed after hours. I remembered the way Ryan lingered in the library even after the lights were off, saying he was looking for the old files. At some point, my husband stopped asking if I was going to come home on time. He knew the answer. I started staying later, walking the halls, checking classrooms, even though there was no reason to. Some nights I'd stand in front of room 212, their homeroom, and just listen. Not for voices, not for footsteps, just anything. The room stayed locked. It always did. But I never could shake the feeling that something behind that door had shifted slightly, like air moving around furniture that wasn't where it used to be. Detective Hayes called me out of the blue on a Thursday, said he was reopening the active side of the case, not publicly, just internally. He wanted to go back through the early statements, recheck timelines, revisit the field where Aiden's phone had pinged. I asked what triggered the renewed interest. He said something strange had come in through the county tip line. A woman from 3 towns over claimed she'd seen one of the students at a gas station. She couldn't say which one. Just remembered the black hoodie and the eyes. Said they didn't look right, like the boy wasn't all the way there. Hayes sounded tired. He always did. But there was a new edge to his voice, like something had moved just enough to wake him back up. I told him about Sarah's email, about the envelope under my desk. He asked if I could bring it to the station. I didn't answer right away. Part of me still didn't want to let it go, but I said yes and hung up. The next morning, I couldn't find the envelope. I tore my office apart, checked between books behind the filing cabinet, even under the seat cushion of my desk chair. Gone. Not just misplaced. Vanished. The drawer it had been in was clean. Too clean. Everything lined up like someone had wiped through it and put things back with more order than I ever managed on my own. I told Hayes. He didn't sound surprised. Said they'd had similar issues. Case notes misfiled. recordings erased or duplicated, leads that vanished into the system like they'd never existed. That weekend, I drove to the field where Aiden's signal had last pinged. I hadn't told anyone I was going. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe a fence, maybe a surveyor's flag. But there was nothing. Just open land, scattered brush, and a rusted cattle gate that didn't lead anywhere. I parked off the shoulder and walked for a while. My boots caught in the tall grass. I heard something in the distance, maybe a hawk, but otherwise it was dead quiet. The kind of quiet that feels forced. About 200 yards in, I stopped. I don't know why. There wasn't a trail or anything. Just a spot where the grass flattened slightly in a circular way like something had been resting there for a long time. I bent down and touched the dirt. It was cool. Not damp, but not dry either. There were no tire tracks, no footprints. But I found a strip of torn paper about the size of a movie ticket wedged beneath a root. It was brittle and faded, but I could still make out 3 words. Check the photo. I didn't take it with me. I stood there holding it for a long time, then folded it back under the root and walked away. When I got back to my car, I checked the time. It was exactly 2:08 p.m. That was the same time the voicemail had come through weeks earlier, the one with no sound. That night I went home and opened the group photo again. I'd looked at it dozens of times before blown it up. Printed copies ran it through filters. But this time I noticed something I hadn't before. In the back corner of the frame, just behind Amber's shoulder, there was a shadow. It wasn't shaped like a student. Too tall, too still. I couldn't see a face. Just the outline. Like someone standing perfectly still in the doorway. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. I shut the laptop and turned off every light in the house. Then I sat in the dark for a long time. Listening. Not for what was outside, but for what might already be in. The following Monday, I returned to school a little before sunrise. I hadn't slept much the night before, not out of fear exactly, but something closer to unease, like I'd left a door open in my mind, and now something was standing just inside it. I unlocked the counseling wing, flicked on the lights, and sat at my desk without taking off my coat. The group photo was still on the screen right where I'd left it. I enlarged the corner again behind Amber's shoulder where that shadow stood. The figure was just too tall, and the angle didn't make sense. There wasn't a person in the doorway that day. I'd been standing off to the side with Mr. Dalton when the photo was taken. I would have seen someone. We all would have. Around mid-morning, Hayes stopped by. He didn't say much, just stood in my doorway holding a slim manila folder. He had this look like something had snapped loose inside him but hadn't quite hit the ground yet. I gestured for him to come in. He placed the folder down gently like he was trying not to wake something. "Gas station footage," he said. 3 towns over, taken at 3:17 a.m. last Friday. He opened the folder and pulled out a print. It was grainy, low light, but the image was unmistakable. A figure standing at pump 5 facing away from the camera. Black hoodie, long frame, shoulders slightly hunched. The timestamp was clear. The location was one I knew off Route 41 in a rural patch of nothing. The boy in the photo was Kyle. I leaned in closer, looking for anything else. His posture was strange, not tired but slack, like he wasn't fully engaged with where he was. One arm hung low, the other lifted like he'd been about to reach for the pump but hadn't finished the motion. Behind him, in the reflection on the station's glass, there was a faint outline of something else. Hayes hadn't mentioned it. I didn't either. He said the clerk on duty hadn't seen him. No purchase was made. No car was caught on any camera. The kid just appeared, stood there for under 2 minutes, and was gone. Hayes rubbed his eyes and said he didn't think it was a prank. The gas station's DVR system was analog. No cloud access, no remote upload. The footage was clean, untouched. And this, he said quietly, tapping the timestamp, is 6 months to the day after the disappearance. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in my office again. I opened Kyle's student file. Not the digital one, the original. We still kept hard copies of the senior guidance materials, and his was thick. He'd written one of his essays on lucid dreaming. Said he used to do it as a kid, but hadn't been able to for years. He talked about the feeling of being half awake, like standing on the edge of something too wide to describe. I remembered reading it the first time and wondering if it was too abstract for admissions. Now it read like something else entirely. Over the next few days, the pattern started pulling tighter. Hayes called again this time about a public library 2 counties east. A woman who worked the front desk claimed she saw a girl matching Sarah Blake's description sitting alone in the nonfiction aisle, head down, hair in her face. When the librarian approached, the girl stood up and walked away. Didn't check out any books, didn't speak, just slipped out the side door and was gone before anyone could get a name. The security camera didn't catch her face, but it showed a figure with Sarah's frame wearing what looked like her old school jacket. A Northwood high patch on the left sleeve. That jacket had never been recovered. I started driving more. Nights, mostly. Just aimless loops around the neighboring towns looking for, I don't know, something out of place. One evening I pulled into a rest stop around midnight. Sat there with the engine off, watching the glow of the vending machines hum against the pavement. And I remembered something Kyle had once said. Not in a session, just in passing. We were talking about post-graduation plans, and he'd mentioned how weird it was that the only place he ever felt truly awake was while driving alone at night. "It's like your mind knows the world's quiet," he said, "and it lets you see more than you're supposed to." I hadn't thought about that in months, but now I couldn't stop. Back at school, the teachers had stopped bringing up the missing students. Not out of apathy, but out of fatigue. You can only carry the same questions for so long before they start grinding into your bones. Mrs. Ellis from the gym told me she sometimes still set out 10 extra chairs during homeroom without meaning to. Mr. Dalton had taken an extended leave of absence, no explanation given. His classroom was reassigned. I asked Davis if anyone had checked on him. He said yes, but didn't look convinced. One afternoon, I decided to go through the senior yearbook proofs. The editor had submitted them right before everything happened, and they'd been sitting untouched ever since. I flipped through, slowly, page by page, stopping at the group section. There they were. Ryan, Amber, Ella Jake, Sarah Kyle. The whole group, mid-laugh in a candid shot taken in the courtyard. Nothing unusual. Except when I tilted the page at a certain angle, I noticed a faint reflection in the glass of the window behind them. Another shape. Same position. Different day. I turned back to the class photo from months before. Pulled it up on my phone. It was faint, but it matched. Same placement. Same height. Slight shift in stance. A presence just outside of center. Always there. Never addressed. I sent a message to Hayes, told him I needed to show him something in person. He agreed to meet the following morning. But that night something changed. At 2:08 a.m. again that exact time, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No text, just an image. It was the original group photo, but altered. The students' faces had been blurred, all 10. Perfect smudges, precise and uniform. But in the back corner, the shadow figure was fully in focus now. Head slightly turned, face not visible, but hands clearly visible. One raised, open, as if waving or warning. I stared at that image for a long time, not sure if I'd fallen asleep at my desk. I saved it, backed it up twice, and turned off my phone. The next morning, it was gone from my gallery. No record of the number. No copy in the cloud. But I remember the shape of the hand. And I remember the number of fingers it had. It wasn't 5. After that night, something shifted in me. I wasn't scared, at least not in the usual way. It was more like a quiet determination settled into my bones, the kind you get when something you thought might be in your head finally shows up in front of you. I didn't tell Hayes about the image. I wanted to, but I needed time to understand what I'd seen, or maybe just to make peace with the fact that I'd seen it at all. So I went back to the school the next day and pulled every archive I had access to. Class schedules, building schematics, staff rosters, IT reports, even old substitute logs. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I just followed what caught my eye. And it was in one of the maintenance records from the spring prior, buried under a list of room reassignments, that I found something strange. Room 112 had been listed as storage closed for HVAC maintenance for nearly 6 months. But that room didn't exist anymore. It had been absorbed into the new science wing 3 years earlier. There shouldn't have been any record of it at all. I walked the halls after the last bell. The science wing was empty. Teachers had cleared out early for a district meeting, and the custodian, Carl, was finishing up the lower level. I didn't ask permission. I just went. The hall that should have led to room 112 now ended in a painted-over cinder block wall, but the floor tiles gave it away. There was a faint seam in the baseboard, a line where the pattern shifted ever so slightly, like the space beyond hadn't been sealed completely. I stood there for a long time listening. Not for sounds exactly, just for any change in the silence. Nothing. But I felt it. Like a pressure in the air centered just behind that wall. I marked the spot with a piece of tape from the art room and left. The next day, I asked Davis if the blueprints for the new wing were still kept in the admin office. He said they'd been digitized and sent to the district's facilities portal. I logged in that afternoon and pulled the file. It showed room 112 listed but labeled unassigned utility access retired. No access point, no notes, no photos. I forwarded it to Hayes without comment. That night he called and asked if I could meet him at the school after hours. I said yes. We met in the lower hall just after 10. Hayes brought a flashlight and a crowbar. Carl had already left. No other staff were on site. We stood in front of the cinder block wall for a few minutes without speaking. Then Hayes pried gently at the seam. The corner gave faster than either of us expected. Just one thin panel over a hollow frame. Behind it was a doorway, metal unmarked and locked with a push bar that had been zip-tied from the inside. It took him 3 tries, but he broke it. The door groaned open. The room beyond wasn't large, maybe 12 by 12. No windows. One single bulb in the ceiling long dead. The floor was concrete unfinished. On the far wall there were markings, thin lines etched into the surface, not paint, not ink. Dozens of them, parallel, uniform, like someone had kept count of something. To the left, an old metal cabinet stood open and empty. In the center of the floor, a chair. Basic wood frame, one leg splintered. A length of cloth lay beside it, frayed at both ends. No blood, no debris. Just the shape of something that had been lived in briefly and unwillingly. Hayes didn't touch anything, neither did I. He stepped outside to call it in. I stayed inside, letting my eyes adjust. In the far corner, I noticed a patch of darker concrete stained but not from water. I leaned closer. Scratched faintly into the floor were the initials SB. My stomach turned. Sarah Blake. I stood up slowly and turned toward the doorway. Just before I stepped out, I saw something tucked behind the cabinet, a scrap of torn notebook paper curled and yellowed. I picked it up with my sleeve. The writing was shaky, uneven. It read, "This isn't where it starts. This is where it ends. That's all." I put it in a plastic sleeve from my satchel and didn't say anything when Hayes came back. They sealed the room again the next morning. Officially, it was declared an unauthorized maintenance alcove from a prior renovation. The district issued a statement about construction misfiling, said it would be corrected. Nothing more. Hayes told me off the record that they found one long strand of hair and a piece of torn shoelace in the cabinet. No matches in the national database, no prints, no DNA hits. But he also said something else. Said the markings on the wall weren't tally marks. They were evenly spaced to precise. When examined under UV, they formed a pattern, not a drawing, more like a schematic. He didn't say what it resembled. Maybe he didn't know. I stopped going to the school after that, took a leave of absence, told them it was for health reasons. They didn't ask for details. I spent my days at home sorting through the notes I'd collected over the months, the timeline, the clues, the voices on the edge of things. Every so often I'd check the town forums just to see if anyone had posted something strange and encounter a sighting anything. Most of it was nothing, static, but one thread caught my eye. A woman from a neighboring county had posted about her daughter's recurring dream. Said the girl described a room with no windows and a sound like wires humming through water. Said she drew the same figure over and over, a tall person with too many fingers. The thread was deleted 3 hours later. That night I played back a voicemail from 3 weeks earlier, one I'd saved without remembering why. It was 5 seconds of silence followed by a low thrum like wind inside a pipe. When I slowed the audio to half speed, I caught a word buried under the static. Just one word, repeat. I listened again, and again. Then I opened the group photo one more time, scanned each face, each corner. And for the first time I looked not at the students but at the background. The tiles, the clock, the room behind the windows. There was something wrong with the angle. It didn't match the building's actual layout. The glass should have reflected the hallway. Instead, it showed a space with no doors, just a white wall and a chair, the same kind we found in room 112. And somewhere in the silence that hum started again. Low, constant, waiting. I didn't sleep the night I heard the hum return. Not even close. It wasn't coming from my phone this time. It was somewhere deeper. Almost like it had moved into the walls, slow and deliberate the way old pipes sometimes whisper when they're warming up. I walked my house in a loop bedroom to kitchen to back hallway listening for it. And then, just before dawn, it stopped. Not with a fade. Not like something shutting off. It just cut. Gone mid-note. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at nothing until the light changed. Hayes called just after 8. There was a pause on the line when I picked up the kind that lets you know someone hasn't figured out how to phrase what they're about to say. Then he asked if I could come down to the station. I told him yes. He didn't give a reason. When I arrived, he walked me into one of the smaller interview rooms. Neutral gray walls, old chairs that creaked when you sat. He slid a file across the table, manila-thick no markings on the front. "We got something from the Department of Energy," he said, of all places. I looked at him. He looked tired again, like he'd been in that building too long. I opened the file. Inside was a transcript. Partial, heavily redacted. No case number. No agency header. Just initials. At the top, someone had handwritten the name Lydia Hales. I hadn't heard that name in almost a year. I remembered her as a junior, quiet, attentive one of those students who always seemed to be paying attention even when her eyes were down. She'd graduated early, moved out of state, or so we were told. She was never officially listed among the missing, but everyone knew she'd been close with Ella and Sarah. I read the first few lines of the transcript, then looked up. "Where did this come from?" I asked. Hayes just shook his head. The interview was dated 6 weeks after the disappearance. Lydia had shown up at a federal facility in Maryland alone, asking to speak to someone in charge of containment. She told them she'd been part of a group taken tested, monitored, said they'd been told they were special, said the photo was a marker, that whoever was in it, whoever was behind it, had already been selected. I read it 3 times. The words didn't change. She described a room without walls, a corridor with no angles. She said time had folded, that was the word she used, and that some of the others hadn't survived it. Not physically, not mentally. What struck me most was how calm she sounded. Not panicked, not unstable, just tired, controlled. She told them she remembered being taken not all at once, but in pieces through sound, through light, through repetition. She said they were told they were lucky, chosen. She said they were being studied for something that hadn't happened yet. Hayes closed the file. They never released her, he said. She's still listed as a secure witness under federal observation. No contact, no location. I asked him why we were only seeing this now. He didn't answer. Later that afternoon, I went home and dug through the old archive boxes I kept in the basement. I hadn't touched them in months. In one of them, under lesson plans and orientation packets, I found a DVD. No label, just a blue dot drawn in marker. I didn't remember making it. I didn't remember keeping it, but I brought it upstairs and loaded it into an old laptop. It opened immediately, no menu, no timestamp, just video. It was footage from the school library. Camera angle from above fixed wide across the front desk and reading tables. It had to be after hours. Lights dim, no students. And then, around the 23-minute mark, I saw them. Ryan, Ella, Jake. All three walking together. They didn't speak. They didn't even look at each other. They walked to the center of the room and stood still, for nearly a full minute. Then, without a word, they turned and left frame in different directions. But here's the thing. That footage was dated 5 days after the disappearance. That was impossible. The school had been locked. The cameras were off. No one was supposed to be there. But there they were. I froze the frame. I zoomed in. The timestamp held. April 18th, 3:41 a.m. The next morning, I printed stills and brought them to Hayes. He took one look and said we had to go back to the school, not to search, just to walk the building, to see if anything felt wrong. We arrived around dusk, let ourselves in through the back custodial entrance. No alarms, no lights. The building was still familiar in the way all old places are, the way they carry weight even when they're empty. We walked the library first. It was just as I remembered. Same tables, same carpet, same faint smell of old paper and HVAC dust. But when we reached the corner where the students had stood in the video, Hayes stopped. He pointed at the ceiling. "Camera's missing," he said. I looked up. He was right. There was a patch where the mount should have been. No bracket, no wiring. Just a smoothed-over section of tile like it had never been installed at all. We stood there for a long time. Neither of us spoke. Then, without planning it, we walked the entire perimeter of the school. The gym, the art rooms, the lower hallways. And eventually, we ended up back where I'd found the sealed wall months ago. The panel was still there, but someone had reinforced it. Screws now, not just adhesive, fresh paint, no give. Hayes stepped back, looked down the hallway. Then he asked me if I'd ever seen the original construction permits for the school. I said no. He told me he'd pulled them that week. Said there were inconsistencies. Rooms that never made it into the blueprints. Utility corridors that were started then marked non-functional and abandoned. He said the firm contracted for the renovation had gone under mid-project. And when he'd tried to contact the foreman listed, he'd been told the man had never worked there. That night, I opened my notebook and started writing again. This time, not just the events, but the patterns, the dates, the phrases that repeated. I made a grid marking every instance of 2:08 a.m., every place the number 112 appeared, every shadow caught in reflection. It formed a shape, not linear, not a map exactly, but something. A spiral, with the group photo at its center. I stared at it until the page blurred. And somewhere beneath it all, I began to feel that same hum again. This time not in the house, but in me. The hum didn't fade like a sound does when a car drives away. It stayed with me steady, internal, like something nested just beneath the base of my skull. At first, I told myself it was exhaustion, or stress, or a combination of everything I'd been dragging around since the day those kids vanished. But by the end of that week, I stopped pretending. It wasn't in my head. It was somewhere deeper. And it wasn't just sound anymore. It was movement, patterns, glimpses of something pressing up from underneath the edges of what we still called normal. I stopped going outside during daylight. The world felt too loud, too sharp. At night, I'd sit by the window with the lights off, watching the street in front of my house like it might fold in on itself. I started seeing numbers again, 112, 208, 0418, turning up on receipts, address plates, license tags. None of it meant anything alone, but together it formed a rhythm I couldn't ignore. And then the call came. It was Hayes. Not the usual line. He called from a restricted number voice, low, slower than usual. Said a girl had walked into the Hill County substation and asked to speak with someone about the Northwood case. Wouldn't give her name at first. Then, in the interview room, she'd whispered it, Lydia Hales. The same girl from the redacted transcript. The one no one was supposed to know existed. Hayes told me she looked older than her years, skin drawn tight over her face like she'd been through something that rewired her from the inside out. She had dirt under her fingernails and didn't blink much. Didn't flinch either, just sat with her hands folded quiet until they brought out a photo, the class picture. Then she started talking. I met Hayes at the station the next morning. He didn't try to stop me when I asked to see her. He just led me through the back hall past the supply room and vending machine to a small room with mirrored glass and a single table. Lydia sat alone, pale gray hoodie drawn up over her head. She didn't look at the door when we entered. Didn't move. I sat across from her, slowly, careful not to startle her. Up close, she looked thin, too thin, like someone who hadn't eaten properly in weeks, or maybe longer. I introduced myself, told her I worked at Northwood. Her fingers twitched slightly on the tabletop. Then she finally lifted her eyes to mine. You were the one who saw it, she said. Not a question. Just a fact. I didn't ask what she meant. I just nodded. She told her story in pieces. There were gaps. Places where she paused like she was trying to pull something from memory that hadn't settled all the way back into place. She said the group had been marked months before they vanished. Not chosen randomly, but selected, observed, patterns recorded, dreams altered. She said it started with sound. Specific tones piped into classroom speakers under the pretense of announcements, then lights, certain frequencies, timed flickers between periods, subtle shifts. No one noticed except Sarah. She was the first to wake up inside it, Lydia said. I asked her what it was. She didn't answer right away, just looked down at the table, then back up at the mirror. You think it's a place, she said finally. But it isn't. It's a condition. I didn't understand what she meant. Hayes leaned forward gently, asked her where she'd been for the last year. Lydia looked at him, then at me, then somewhere far beyond the room. Not where she said. When. She told us the space they were taken to didn't follow linear time. That days folded over. Weeks looped. That some of them, Ryan, Ella, Amber, held on longer than others. She didn't know what happened to Kyle, or Jake, or Sarah. She said they stopped being them after a while. She didn't explain. Just went quiet. I asked her how she got out. Her lip trembled for the first time. She said there was a moment, one moment when she was alone. No sound, no walls, no rules. And in that stillness, she made a decision. To forget. To let go. And when she did, she was outside again. Hayes asked her who did it. Who was responsible? Lydia's jaw tightened. You won't find them in a report, she said. You won't find them at all. She told us about the man behind the glass in the group photo. Said he was part of it. Not a person, not really. More like an interface. a fixed point where the structure tethered itself to this side of reality. They needed something to pull them through, she whispered. A face, a moment, a pattern that would loop forever. She looked straight at me. You saw the hand, didn't you? I nodded. She exhaled and said, Then it saw you too. We sat with her for nearly 2 hours. Most of what she said can't be processed through any lens we know. But there were parts specific, consistent, rooted in things that matched what we'd found, the cabinet, the markings, the time-stamped footage. Hayes recorded it all, every word, then locked the tape in a case file that never made it to the department's central system. The girl disappeared that night, gone from her holding cell, No sign of forced entry, no video feed, no trace. Just a folded paper on the bench where she'd been sitting. It read, Don't look for me. Look for the first sound. The next day, Hayes went silent. Wouldn't return my calls. His office line rang twice, then dropped. His cell disconnected. I drove to his apartment after sunset. The door was open, lights off. On his desk was a note with just 4 numbers, 0418. The day they vanished. I sat in my car for a long time before driving home. I didn't know what to do next, who to call, what this was even becoming. But sometime after midnight I walked to my kitchen window and looked out across the street. Under the sodium light near the edge of the sidewalk, a figure stood. Not close, not moving, just watching. I couldn't see the face. I didn't try. I just closed the curtain and sat back down at the table. It wasn't over, and it wasn't waiting anymore. After that night, I didn't see Hayes again. His apartment was cleared out within a week. No record of a forwarding address, no resignation, nothing in the system. Just silence, like he'd been folded out of the picture entirely. The department called it a leave of absence unofficial. The few who remembered him acted like they didn't. I stopped asking after the second conversation that trailed off into a shrug. I kept the paper with the numbers 0418 tucked into the back of my wallet. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want to forget. Maybe because I needed something to hold on to that hadn't been erased. The school district quietly closed Northwood the following spring. Official cause was mold structural issues, budget reallocation. No press release, no announcement. They just stopped sending buses that way, and by summer the lot was fenced in. When I drove past one afternoon in July, I saw that the main sign had been taken down. Nothing remained but the brick foundation and a few outlines where the letters used to be. I parked across the street for a while, windows rolled up, engine running. The building looked smaller than I remembered. Like whatever had lived inside it had finally pulled loose and gone elsewhere. I kept working for a time, transferred departments, taught part-time, gave quiet interviews to people who knew not to record. But I stopped telling the full story. Too many faces looked at me like I was the one unraveling. I understood that. I still do. There are things you carry that don't make sense on paper. Not because they aren't real, but because they're too real to fit into the version of the world we're all trained to accept. Lydia Hales was never officially found. No missing person case, no follow-up. But sometimes, late at night, I reread the note she left behind. Look for the first sound. I still don't know what it means. Maybe I never will. What I do know is this: they were real. Kyle, Ella, Sarah, Ryan, Amber, Jake. They were real kids with real lives. And something took them not just out of this town, but out of time. Out of the parts of memory we trust to stay fixed. And no one came looking. Not hard enough. Not soon enough. Most people don't want to believe in things that don't end with a reason or a record. They want files closed, conclusions, written stories wrapped in tape. But this one never closed. It just went quiet. If there's anything I've learned from all of this, it's that forgetting is the final erasure. You don't have to explain everything to remember it. You just have to decide that a name, a moment, a presence mattered, that it counted even if the record was wiped clean. So if this story stayed with you, say the names out loud, or leave a comment below. Share it if you want. Just don't let it disappear. Not all things that vanish are lost. Some are just waiting for someone to remember them.